Yeah, I get it. This idea had been out there for a while. It's a little old. But today we have ourselves 14 games on in the NHL, which makes it a little difficult to try to schedule a show around teams that aren't playing. So the best I could do is make a video right now in the midst of a Vancouver-Detroit game that in which I'll probably be watching between two teams that play later in the afternoon. This will probably be a messy day, all things considered. But today, let's go over onto Sportsnet and a lot of the trade proposals that they had on their show about a week ago. What they did was they had a lot of their panel analysts go out there and make predictions, and that was the term that they used, predictions, quote-unquote. Not necessarily, tossing out hypotheticals or whatever. They were making predictions. And I get it, it's TV, it's for the purpose of entertainment, so I don't really think any of these analysts were going out there and saying, okay, I think this is going to happen 100% in my heart of hearts, this is going to happen and I believe it. It was more so, hey, this is going to happen. This is my TV take for the day. Because that's ultimately what is entertaining now, isn't it? But either way, let's go over onto one of the many trade proposals that we saw an NHL analyst on Sportsnet say was going to happen. It's Keith Yandle, former Ironman and former, I guess we could say, Arizona Coyote, Florida Panther. He was everywhere pretty much, and he had himself a trade that had fans of the Chicago Blackhawks and the Toronto Maple Leafs talking. This is the proposal right here. According to Keith Yandle, the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to acquire Jonathan Toews with salary retained. He did say that in the video segment, in exchange for Nick Robertson and a second-round pick in 2024. Now, because of the format of the show, they kind of just showed off the trade proposal. They talked about it for about 15 seconds and then they moved on to another one. But overall, because this idea was tossed out there, Jonathan Toews to the Leafs in exchange for Robertson in a second, I wanted to go over it in this video here, because when it comes to the Maple Leafs and their potential trade deadline acquisitions, I don't think too many Leafs fans had Jonathan Toews as one of those potential names. Sure, you had the wingers, you had guys like Timo Meier in there, you had the defensemen like Chychrun, and some other names tossed around, but Jonathan Toews is a really interesting one. Mostly because when it comes to the conversations about centers, sure, Toews is there, but everybody also talked about Ryan O'Reilly and Bo Horvat to a much greater capacity, I feel. Sean Monahan is another one that I've seen thrown around there a lot, not necessarily to the same capacity as a Toews. That doesn't change the fact, though, that this season Toews is actually doing pretty okay for the standards that we kind of have for the guy nowadays. I mean, in 46 games played, he's got 28 points, on pace for 48 total points, 24 goals, and 24 assists. That is his projection over 78 games played. A pretty big step up, honestly, from last season wherein he only had 37 points in 71 games. Of course, we know that the year before that he didn't play the entire season, so just seeing Toews being able to play just in general is a good thing. Seeing him bounce back and producing the amount of points that he is in his final contract year, making 10.5 AAV a season, of course, with that no-move clause that everybody talks about. This is a bounce back for a guy that ultimately will be trying to get himself onto another team and hopefully contending for a Stanley Cup for the fourth time in his career. That being said, though, when it comes to Toronto, sure, you could go out there and say that going for a Toews is not really going for the moon. You're not going out there and shooting in the stars, you're just kind of getting an okay guy. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that for a lot of these guys on the market, I mean, there are going to be other teams with more cap space and more assets to burn than Toronto. And so maybe it's a good thing to go out there and talk about players like Toews specifically, or maybe Sean Monahan from the Habs. Might I remind you here, Jonathan Toews is actually having a better season than Ryan O'Reilly is right now, as Ryan O'Reilly has fewer points and he is on a worse pace as well. And just saying, even though Jonathan Toews is no longer the Jonathan Toews that he used to be, the Selke caliber, Captain Serious 80-point caliber guy, this is a player that if you have him on your third-line center spot, you're probably laughing, and you're thinking about the center punch of Matthews, Tavares, and then Toews. This idea, proposed by Keith Yandle, doesn't include Kerfoot because apparently every trade that the Maple Leafs do has to involve Kerfoot, but maybe in Yandel's world of the Maple Leafs and their future, you might be seeing another trade with Kerfoot actually getting moved, and that's what frees up the space for Toews in the first place. Who really knows? There's a lot of needed context to really contextualize a Toews for Robertson and a second trade, but ultimately when it comes to that return, I'm honestly kind of feeling it's a bit fair. Like, to be honest, Nick Robertson and the profile that he has, sure, I'm a very big believer in Robertson, and everybody knows that his brother Jason Robertson is one of the best players in the world right now. But Nick, during the unfortunate season that he has had, only 17 total games played split between the Maple Leafs and the Marlies due to injury this season. He has been sidelined so much over the past few years, he has played so little over the past few years as well, especially with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that it's kind of, dare I say, disappointing to see the path that he has gone down. Of course, it's disappointing to see the injuries pile up, but from the perspective of evaluating his overall value, it's difficult to go out there and say that Nick Robertson today is as valuable on the trade market as he was, let's say, 3 years ago when he was a 55-goal in 46-game guy in the OHL. In this time frame, everybody was talking about Robertson as if he was better than Cole Caulfield and everything, and it was a really big deal. Leafs fans shoving the Robertson conversation into every corner of the internet. Robertson was a super hot prospect, but as time has gone on, he hasn't really been able to translate that to the NHL level and stay healthy in the process. Sure, he produces well when he's with the AHL team, the Marlies, but then again, he's only played 2 games in total this season in the AHL, so there's a lot more to be desired when it comes to Robertson and his development. Sure, he is only 21 years old, so I don't want to go out there and write this guy off in the slightest, but if you are thinking about it from a trade point of view, the idea that Robertson is no longer worth as much as he had been in the past makes sense to me. And if you wanted to package him with a second-round pick for a guy like Jonathan Toews, a guy whom the Chicago Blackhawks are likely going to move anyway for whatever it is they can get on the market for a 10.5 AAV guy, I think that if the Blackhawks are willing to be patient and capitalize on the long-term potential that a guy like Nick Robertson has, this could be a pretty good deal for both sides. Jonathan Toews and Johnny Tavares playing together as a 2-3 center punch, and then of course you have yourselves the youth going over to Chicago. If everything goes down in the best-case scenario, then Nick Robertson becomes, let's say, a 65 to 70-point NHL player. I don't think he becomes as good as Jason, but I don't want to go out there and discredit a Robertson from achieving more than I'm expecting out of them, especially since, the Filipino guys, I got to cheer on my fellow Pinoy brethrens, but either way, if you're going to go out there and acquire Nick Robertson, you have to be sure that all the setbacks and injuries that he has faced are going to stay in the past pretty much, because we do know the talent that he has. It's just he's been so slowed down by circumstances that you have to pretty much put your faith in this guy to develop at a proper rate outside of those lost years where he's not playing an extended amount of time. See if he could speed up the process and recuperate all the lost time, and hopefully just make himself a home at the NHL level, because sure, he had some time with the Maple Leafs the past few years, but it was never really a lot. So I personally am quite concerned about the development of Nick Robertson so far. Of course, what do you do about a guy getting injured as much as Robertson has been? So I don't really want to go out there and say it's anybody's fault, but at the same time, his value, in my opinion, has indeed gotten down there, that if you wanted to make a trade with this guy involved, you're probably adding a second, and you're probably getting a guy like Jonathan Toews back that isn't the main fish, Timo Meier, Jacob Chychrun-esque guy. So if you're a Maple Leafs fan, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Keith Yandel's trade proposal that he says will happen. Toews with salary retained to the Toronto Maple Leafs for a second and prospect Nick Robertson. Do you think there's anything that I missed? Any more angles that you think are worth talking about in this discussion regarding these two teams? Is there really a fit, or is there not? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj 99. And bye.